His second example was that in St. Louis, Aryan Chopra, grandmaster from India, who was also in top eight, so he was counted among the top eight. He withdrew after 5 rounds of the tournament. So this was because of illness. Like a bunch of players got sick. I was one of them. Uh, but some of the players got sick to the point that they didn't feel like playing anymore, which I understand.
Just to
And
clarify on that point and to add another point of context, in the contract that was signed before the tournament, you had to specify you are allowed to take, I believe, 2 buys. I hope I'm not mistaken on the number, but I believe it was 2 buys. You had to announce the 2 buys or none if you wanted, or 1 buy, whatever your number was. You had to announce it before the tournament started, and also you wouldn't be able to withdraw or like take buys for anything but force majeure. And in this case, it was force majeure.
but they also forfeited their prize. I mean, they couldn't get a prize because they
Correct.
withdrew. So it wasn't because they wanted to. Um, I mean, they just got sick. Like
Correct.
I think there was someone else who got sick too, but I don't think that player was in the top eight. I think it
Mihail,
was
Mihail
Mihail.
Antipov got sick as well. To be honest, I mean, there were a couple of people that were getting sick, and I can tell you from my experience, I got sick myself as well immediately
I
after the
got sick
tournament
too. I mean,
was over.
I was really sick at the end. It was brutal.
Yeah. So it
Um,
happens. I mean, you cannot control these type
okay,
of things,
but
right?
this thing could happen in any tournament. So it's not. I don't think this is a very good example because I mean, he also says it didn't lead to a significant impact in the rating average. But it's also like he says it's a loophole. I would, I mean, although I overall agreed, I would kind of disagree because getting sick and withdrawing is not a loophole. Like if the point is that players can withdraw and collude, this could represent a loophole, but it would be collusion and it would be cheating. And in this case, like, the other day we spoke to Dubov and he tested positive for COVID in one of the Tata Steels and he was forced to withdraw. Like it just happens that you can get sick, right? So this is not really part of the FIDE circuit. Now, his point that to give an example, let's say you have a tournament that's open to 100 people and 92 of them are rated under 2000. And the top eight are the top eight best players in the world. And after the tournament starts, numbers 2 through 7 all drop out for whatever reason. And then the number one seed beats up on a bunch of under 2000s and gets awarded for a tournament with a top eight average of 2760 or 2770. This would be a loophole. It would also be so unrealistic that I don't even know if it makes sense to mention it. But in some other, I mean, that would be the general idea. In some like less egregious cases, it is possible. Like if I wanted to orchestrate a tournament, then it would be very easy to do so. I would, for example, have a knockout, um, with uh, let's say 16 players, and the top eight average would be, I would invite um, a bunch of like strong grandmasters, let's say a 2680 average, which would be a very valuable tournament. And then the other players would be a bunch of 2300s. So what would happen is that there would be a few easy matches, and then I would start to play the 2600 guys. But I would get rewarded for a top average rating, top eight average rating of 2680, even though a lot of the matches that I win against are, maybe a 2300 there, a 2400 there, right?
Yes.
I'm sure that you could give it a different example. And it would make, because in a knockout format, you have to win a limited number of matches. Each match will be difficult, but if you pad it with a bunch of players who you're heavy favorites against, then it makes it much easier to get to the final and win the final. And I actually have a concrete example of this, which um, it's not an indictment on any of the players or organizers. It just shows a potential problem with the rules, which I think happened naturally. I also gave this example in my tweet. It was the WR Chess Masters with an average rating of 2754. And the top players in the tournament were Arjun Erigaisi, Alireza Firouzja, Praggnanandhaa, Vidit were playing, Raunak Sadhwani was playing, Notabek Abdusattar was playing, so on and so forth. So I'll just give like one example I think highlights just how silly the tournament was in terms of the points. So Ali Reza Firouzja got third place, 16.51 points, which is about the same as I got for winning the US Masters, roughly. Like I think I got 17.03 or whatever. So he got half a point less. Now, for his performance, he played Vaishali. I think he won 1.5. He won the match. Then he played Raunak Sadhwani, who forfeited a game, and then they drew the other game. And then he lost the match to, let me just make sure. I think it was Maxime. He lost the match to Maxime. I'm like reasonably certain that's what happened. This performance is, for him, it was probably a huge disappointment. It is like completely unremarkable. I mean, he beat someone who was 350
Well, first of
points lower
all,
than him.
uh, yeah, Sadhwani forfeited the game, right? So,
Yeah, but still, I mean, it still is an issue. I mean, forfeit is like it's strange to say to have an issue with like someone taking a bye, but not someone having a forfeit in a tournament, but it still counts, right?
it
I mean,
was it was a much less straining performance, much less straining, I would say, tournament
not only
overall.
straining, but just the performance is below average for him. I
Sure,
mean,
yes,
one
and
match
he
he
got
beat someone who he's like a 99% favorite to win. One match he won, he was a favorite, but he also won by a forfeit, more or less, and he drew the second game. He lost rating in the tournament. He lost his next match to someone who, let's say, was a 50-50. And he got the same amount of points as he got 3 more points than +4 in Tata Steel. He got more points than my candidate's performance, which was +3 with a 28-30 performance, more or less. He got the same as 8 out of 9 in the US Masters. I mean, I'm just using that as an example. It's not anyone's fault from the players. It just shows that the system has an issue and like knockouts are actually the clearest way to exploit the issue.
yes,
Or not to maybe just to accidentally exploit it, but still that a knockout with like a few weaker players just suddenly like skews the event if the average top eight average. I think there's like ways to fix this, and I actually thought of a very decent way to fix this. Um, I actually think that like some people from FIDE sometimes watch our show, so they might even find it useful potentially. But if you have, and this also fixes opens, I think. So if you have a tournament with 50 or more players, which is what the FIDE circuit designates as like an open tournament, right? You have to play two of them. Then the top 15 average counts. This means that you can't really like pad the top and then have weaker players. This makes the tournament either generally very strong, because top 15 you're going to play a bunch of those guys, or the tournament will average rating will be diminished and the points will follow that. For knockouts, I think every single player should be counted in the average. I just think that that's logical because every single player is kind of part of like in an open tournament, there's a bunch of guys who are not going to play a role in the final standings too much, right? They're just there to play, but they're not there to necessarily win. They have very little chance.
I think that
But in the
makes a lot of
knockout,
sense. I think that makes a lot of
mostly,
sense.
and then I think for closed tournaments, um, I don't see why top eight uh, average necessarily makes sense. Like I think in a closed tournament, also all the players should be counted. That to me makes the most sense. Like in the candidates, it was top eight average because there's eight players, so that makes sense. It's top eight. In Tata Steel, I think then all 14 players should count towards the average, logically,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then what they changed in general, which I think makes sense, although I think it could also turn into an issue, but you can't really predict this too much, but I think it makes sense, is that they're counting Norway chess with 6 players,
They
which is
don't
a bit of
name
a
it specifically, but yes, it seems to be
yeah.
impacting Norway chess. It's the double round robin tournaments with at least 6 participants, which is most likely going to be Norway chess. Average rating of 2,700 will also be eligible for circuit points. Yeah,
It's directly
that's
because of Norway chess. It makes sense because Norway chess should count.
it should.
It could also be that another event pops up that's 6 players and it looks looks strange in hindsight. But I don't think it's a bad decision. I think it's a correct decision most likely to do this.
Somewhat of a decision that some people had issues with, controversial, was their third point, reduction for points for tournaments with multiple rounds in one day. This directly impacts tournaments held in the United States. Obviously, US Masters, for example, St. Louis Masters, the ones that you played, were played with 2 rounds a day. Very, very fast tournaments. They finish in 5 days. And then basically those type of tournaments, the circuit points allocated for them have been diminished. This obviously sparked quite a conversation. Peter Giannatos, who is the CEO and the person in charge at Charlotte, came out and said that this is somewhat discriminating. And it makes a lot of sense because I'm not 100% sure what they're trying to achieve with this. I believe their idea is to reduce points. This is the way, and I'm paraphrasing it, to reduce points for short tournaments where the compressed schedule might not reflect the same level of effort as longer events. I'm not 100% sure whose effort they're talking about. Are they talking about the organizer's effort? Are they talking about the player's effort, that they're going to have to spend less days in a particular event? I'm not 100% sure what their rationale is behind this, and I don't agree necessarily with it being reduced. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I also disagree. I don't see what, like, if you want to solve the issue of maybe some opens are too, I actually think this was the case that some opens are too valuable. And there's going to be a few examples of that just by points, like they awarded too many points. Then I think that just adding more places that count, like I mentioned 15, that's a bit arbitrary, but it could be 15, it could be 12, it could be 20. I think that would definitely mitigate the issue with that. The the issue with like double round, I just don't because this is a very this is something that's existed in the US for a very long time.
It's not new.
Yeah, this has been like decades and decades and decades. People have played 2 games a day. Now you can say it's not the most professional, sure, but most people who play US Opens are not professional players. And most of them have jobs, most have limited time. It's a different scene entirely from European tournaments. Now, I don't think people like playing 2 games a day. It's just that like schedule very often doesn't permit. Like people have less vacation time in the US from their job. And this is just the chess culture in the US. So if you implement, so first you implement a change which requires players who want to fight for the FIDE circuit to play open tournaments. And then you penalize specifically open tournaments from one country, which is the US, for something that the US has been doing for decades. It doesn't feel right. And also, what's the issue with 2 rounds a day? Sure, it's maybe not the most professional, but it isn't easier. It's more difficult.
Yeah.
Like if we're talking about like pure sport, which combines, physical fitness and everything else, I wouldn't say that it makes it less sportive. It maybe makes it more like, when we play rapid chess, we don't have these considerations. You could play 4 rapid games a day, or you could play 12 rapid games a day, depending on the matches, right? Like I could play, uh, I've done this, right? I've played like a match that's 4 games, and then there's an Armageddon, and then another match that's 4 games, and then Armageddon. And sometimes we do this with like a play-in phase, right? Which is a few games. Like I've played 9 hours of rapid chess in a row, and nobody really differentiates that from the very like standard Grand Chess Tour 3 games of rapid chess, right? Which is very like 3 games of rapid chess, 3 hours. It's totally different amount of time and effort that we spend, but it's just, rapid chess. But when it's classical chess, there's this like huge distinction. And I really wonder also, this WR Chess Masters was also 2 games a day. Now, because that's a match, does that count as 2 games a day? Is that like diminished points for that? Or because it's one match, does it count as one match a day? And I don't know. I would also like to hear um what the answer is there.
Well, that's actually a very
And
good point because I think they don't specify that it's based and it's only for opens. It just says tournaments with 2 rounds a day. So that's the issue.
Yeah, but does it count as a round, like one match? Because in WR they played one match a day. It was two games, two classical games, plus a potential playoff. One game, I think. Now, or maybe it was two games. I don't know. But it was a brutal schedule for them too. I'm not saying that it was an easy tournament. It was like really tough. And by the way, Arjun won deservedly. He did win two matches against top players. But I feel like the points were kind of inflated a bit because he also won two matches against players who he was a significant favorite against. One of those players was, I think, this young girl, Bodana, who is a great talent, but obviously she's not going to have much of a chance or any chance against Arjun or another top player in a match, right? Um, but like he got 25.4 points, which is close to the highest you can get. I think the highest that anyone got was Ali Reza Firouzja for Singfield Cup, 28.67 points, which by the way is very deserving, I think, because he had like +3. I mean, very good result. Very, very good result. And for example, when Gukesh won the candidates, he got 26.94 points. Uh, but 26.94 is not much more than the 25.4 that Arjun got for the WR Masters. So to me, if you weigh the two tournaments, which is more difficult to win, I would say the candidates by a huge, uh, a huge factor. I mean, it's not like slightly more difficult to win. It's not much more difficult to win. It is astronomically more difficult to win the candidates tournament than a tournament where you have to win two mini matches against someone who's around your level or perhaps a bit lower.
I don't think that's debatable.
Yeah, it's not really a debate, but why are the points close or comparable? So I know we're a bit off topic again. It's like these points very often seem arbitrary to me, which is the main issue. And maybe this also highlights an issue with the FIDE circuit as a whole, because when you don't have control over the format, which they don't, because they're including pretty much all tournaments throughout the year, they have very limited control. Like they can say you have to play two opens, but then there's going to be like 25 different types of opens, and then they say, okay, the opens, if they're 2 rounds a day, they get less points. But then there's going to be this or that, and it's the top 8 average, but why not the top 10? Why not the top 12? Why not the top 6? Like, uh, there's just too many. You can't get the regulations right because there's too many potential ways to exploit them after the fact. Like you can't. It's not even their fault. You just can't cover every possibility.
And to their credit, I think generally directionally they're doing a good job. I do feel like it's quite exciting. The FIDE circuit is quite an exciting way to try to qualify. It incentivizes play in open tournaments and for the top players, which I think is quite important as well. Now, obviously, there's loopholes and perhaps there's ways to exploit the system, but that's the case in pretty much any system you have. Last year, it
Not really any system. Like the World Cup, for example.
yes,
There's nothing really to debate. I mean, you win 6 matches, you get to the final
but you're
four.
not going to be able to like give four spots to the World Cup, right?
No, no, they give three. I mean, they could also give two, it would be logical. But to get to top three, you need to win 6 matches,
No, the
then
World
you could
Cup is
lose one,
tough. Yeah, it's the
and then you
toughest
could
way
win
to
another.
qualify.
But nobody will argue that if you know, you won 7 matches in a tournament against very strong grandmasters. Like every match I played last time was against a grandmaster. From the third round forward, from the second round forward, I was playing 2650 grandmasters up. From the third round forward, I was playing 2700 grandmasters up. From the fourth round, I played Duda, then Lenier, and then a bit unusually, at some point, I played a Basov. But that was because he was having the tournament of his life. And he was 2650, right? But that was a bit unusual to face someone who's under 2700. And I didn't win the tournament. Magnus did. Pragnanda got second. I was third, Abasa fourth. But you can't say that winning 7 matches and losing one, I didn't deserve, right?
Right.
It was a good performance. It was a worthy performance, let's say, right? With the FIDE circuit, you can find issues. I mean, it's not like whether Arjun qualifies, I qualify, or if Notre Beck, I don't think he has a theoretical chance anymore, but let's say he did. Nobody would have an issue with the player because we all are, top five in the world, right? Um, but they might have an issue with some individual tournaments, logically, like my US St. Louis Masters, US Masters, the WR Masters, this or that. Tata Steel, not counting enough, counting too much, whatever. Um, and for me, like part of the issue is that this does feel kind of like a lazy way to decide it because FIDE doesn't put effort into it's not their tournaments, they're not organizing them. They just take all the tournaments and then they award points. It's basically a minimal effort way of deciding two candidate spots. While in the past, the two spots would be decided by the FIDE Grand Prix with the prize fund. To give an example, Hikaru and Richard Rapport qualified last time through the FIDE Grand Prix 2022. Now that's a tournament with a prize fund. FIDE has to organize it. That they took that away and replaced it with the FIDE circuit feels a bit like, you know, they didn't want to put the money
I
into it.
think the argument was, sure, maybe not the money, but also it had a bit of an elitist, let's say, feel to it because it wasn't an open tournament. It was based on other factors. I don't remember. It was only invitational, perhaps a wild card, and then based on rating. Was that the case?
Or, I mean, well, the FIDE Grand Prix, I don't remember exactly the format, but many grandmasters played who were not like, top five in the world. Uh, I think, like for example, take an example of Gregorio Parn. He played the FIDE Grand Swiss. From the FIDE Grand Swiss, Ali Reza and myself, we qualified top two, and then Grigori got third place, and third place qualified to the FIDE Grand Prix. For example, like there was some system, maybe it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't like you saw only five people in the Grand Prix. It was, players who were sometimes 2650, 2700, 2750. We spoke to Dubov the other day, as I mentioned. He was playing the FIDE Grand Prix. Grishik was playing a wide variety of different ratings. And um, anyway, I'm not saying that system was
Yeah,
perfect either, but when people say like it's too elitist, I'm also like, what do you mean? Do you want like 2300? Like, it's not like people besides the top players would have a chance. I mean, you could also have the FIDE circuit and you only see people who are top 10 in the world.
that
Like, I'll
seems to
just
be the
list
case.
the top, I'll just list the top five. It's Arjun, Noterbek, Firouzja, Gukesh, and myself. Six is Pragnanta. After six, the difference in points is from first to seventh is like, 80 points. So I don't know if that's, I mean, after that, it's Noterbek, Yakubov, Amin Tabatabai.
I, I'm not gonna lie. I like it. I like the FIDE circuit idea, just for the simple fact that it does force players like yourself, players in the top 10, to play open tournaments, and I feel like that raises the awareness of open tournaments, of certain open tournaments, and that raises the prestige of certain open tournaments. So that's the reason why I like it. Obviously, there's a
But if they really wanted to get people to play it like fully, to commit to it, then have a top three prizes,
yeah,
you know, which makes a lot of sense because if you look at the people who actually try, it's basically the people who tried this year were three people. It's
yourself,
me.
Arjun, and Nodirbek. Yeah,
Now, Gukesh didn't try because he won the candidates. Otherwise, I'm sure he would have, but he won the candidates, so he didn't have to try. Ali Reza had a very good position, but he chose not to try for whatever reason he has. I don't know. Pragnanta didn't try either because he didn't really think he could or he didn't want to, whatever reason. But he only played five events. If you don't play the amount of people who actually played seven events, only three. So nobody tried besides the three of us.
yeah, yeah.
So if people aren't trying, then how can you say it's a good system? Like either people think they can make it, or they don't want to make it, or they don't care enough. But if you add top three prizes, then people will be attracted to the money, even if they say I may not win, but I may get third. Then you're actually going to see more participation, which makes it more difficult and also makes it more interesting.
No, it's a very interesting discussion. Obviously, I feel like we've had this discussion so many times, and we always try to expand on it, bring new arguments to it, bring new facts to it, and yeah, let us know what you think in the comments about this. I think this is a very, it's a discussion that's going to last, and it's probably going to expand as we get new information and new ways to qualify, I guess.